was only really until I was in Kasha that time. And Lobsang knocked on the door that night and said, "Oh, don't be afraid if someone comes and beats you in the night because there's a magic man doing a ceremony." I was like, "Oh, okay, something else is going on." And suddenly, like on that trip, I think because I had Pema with me and I'd become friends with her, and her father's a village oracle, or he was. And just suddenly that trip, I was just hearing all these wild stories, and and then I came across hearing about the Muslim oracle, and that was really interesting. Then I felt like, okay, I can include that in a way which reflects what's going on in other ways. And it wasn't really until right at the end that I actually found Selena Day, an anthropologist who'd done all these really PhD, I think, on oracles in Ladakh, and
Hmm.
Patrick, I think it's Kaplanian, and
Hmm.
um, and then when I looked at like how they'd linked that to the social changes going on, and
Yes.
and they'd talked about the Ladakhi concept of space and the mountains, and that's when I really felt like, okay, I can confidently weave that into my story. You know?
Yeah. This, no, this is where you mentioned at some point where I think, in times of great change, you know,
Yeah, there's
they seek, I mean, people generally seek the help of, I don't know,
yeah,
non-scientific help, I guess,
yeah. And people
non-modern
are
science means, you
Yeah,
know.
and people are sort of quite like lighthearted about it as well. So like, oh no, I saw the locusts all eat each other and kill each other. Then they went away, and it was like this magical thing. And they'll laugh a little bit, and not very heavy or dogmatic about anything, which is so they might say, other people go, oh, a lot of people say to me, young people say, oh, I don't know if I believe in oracles, and then, you find out later, oh, they've taken their child off to the oracle and they've got sick, and you're like, okay. So it did take a while to hear that side of things as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, they were probably self-conscious, like everybody is, because the belief is that okay, then you're not being very modern and you're not being with the time if you say that
Exactly.
you still believe in the oracle. But
Yeah.
hey, best to keep all bases covered,
Yeah, exactly.
you know?
That's how my grandmother would have seen it.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what governs the world, right? It's so unpredictable. So
Yeah.
yeah. So what were the most challenging things for you, doing while doing this book?
At first was the fact that I had like no phone coverage. So I'd arranged to somebody else, oh yeah, I'll meet you tomorrow. And then I'd turn up and wait half the day. And then get frustrated and realize I'd wasted a whole day in Ladakh when I've only got a few weeks before, the road might close or something like that. And no running water can be challenging after a while, and
Yeah.
minus whatever degree it was at some point, 23, I think.
Yeah.
Like things like that are hard. But
Yeah.
it's just lovely. Like, and, just to be able to, Pema and I we just, okay, I really want to go out to the Lungnak Valley. I want to go out to these places which haven't been connected. And we just, hitched and traveled around for a while together. And she used to be, oh, there's no cars coming. And we're just walking through the mountains ourselves. And
Oh, lovely.
it was just, yeah, it was very special. Yeah.
Yeah. And her story about, going to that, I mean, it's kind of a familiar story, but it's great that she escaped that aunt,
Yeah.
who offered her the choice of, I mean, going to a nunnery or going, and just sending her off with strangers. And I can imagine many Indians doing this too.
Mm,
It's so
mm.
terrible. I mean, things could have happened to her if she had gone to Delhi. Bad things.
Oh, yes.
No?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's a beautiful young woman. And you can just,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
So so somehow she chose the right thing, even if even that had its. I mean, I went to the nunnery in one of the nunneries in Ladakh, and it's
Mm-hmm.
such a it's such a it's a tough life, but it's very
Mm.
disciplined, and I can see that, if you're coming from a very poor background, it's a better life than what your parents can afford to give you, right? So
Yeah, well, better is, yeah, yeah,
yeah, I know in many ways,
yeah,
like, yeah,
yeah, yeah,
food, shelter, clothing, that in that way,
yeah,
not
options.
beyond that. Yeah, options.
And yeah,
Yeah. So, uh, that man was fascinating. The man who built that road, the monk.
yeah, Meme Chanjo.
Yeah, talk about him. What a fantastic personality.
I
And
know. I really, yeah. So um, I think Norbu had pointed him out on the street and said, "Oh, you have to talk to him. He's an amazing, he's got a really an amazing story." And Norbu is quite an irreverent sort of person, But when he said, "Oh, let's just go down to the street and talk to him," and he said, "Oh yeah, I'll talk to you. Come over." And we said, "Oh, we'll give you a lift home." So we ended up at his house talking, and he talked to us for about 3 hours, I think it was. Um, and I'm lucky then because later on I met him and tried to talk to him again, and he was just bored of journalists at that point. Once he'd won the Padma Shri, he didn't want to have a bar of me, so I was very lucky.
yeah.
um, he was more interested in talking to this little girl next to me, a 2-year-old. She's so lovely, isn't
He
it?
was about, I'm all talked out.
Yeah, yeah, I'm done. Um, so um, he's an interesting character. He's clearly highly intelligent. He learned how to read and write in the monastery. I think he was 12 or 14 or something.
Hmm.
But before that, he was just, taking care of the animals at home. And then he rose to become like in charge of the accounts of the three largest monasteries in Zanskar. And he was like the government representative during the negotiations. Sorry, represented the monasteries during these important negotiations about land rights after independence.
Hmm.
And he's a very generous man. And, he started the first bus service and he opened one of the first stores offering like practical things of use for local people. And anyway, so he went out one day, he'd heard about this road being built out to the Lungnak Valley. And he walked just to see what was going on. And he realized that I think over 10 years had passed and he was outraged that nothing had happened. So then, of course, he decided he'd build a road himself. um, and he tried to convince,
Imagine
like,
that.
yeah,
Imagine
imagine
that.
that. Look at those massive mountains. And he's a very funny character. Like while he was talking, I'd go, "Really?" And he'd laugh. Oh. He's very like, "Oh, if only they let me use dynamite." The government, I knew they wouldn't let me use dynamite to blast through the rock, so I had to use my pickaxe, and he showed me the stump
How
of his thumb, which he'd
did he
lost
lost? Hmm.
um, during the building of the road. Um, yeah, he just
I can imagine those intelligence officers going.
you're thinking he was
I was
crazy.
thinking, this man is nuts. Leaving
Yeah,
us this stuff, because
yeah.
I mean, who would undertake that? You really have to be, I don't know, a different sort of person, like,
Mm. Mm.
to
I
build
think
a
he's
road.
actually designed a few buildings
Oh,
in Zanskar himself and built them himself. Like he's
gosh.
yeah, and I think he won at one point when I spoke to him, he was talking about running for office, but he's not interested now. But he has all these lots of ideas and
Hmm,
yeah,
and it's quite old, no? I mean, because you said when he started building this road, he was 70.
he was started building the road when he was 70, which went over one of the highest mountain ranges.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It's amazing. So now he's what, in his 90s?
I think he'd be in his 80s, late 80s
Mm.
now. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
gosh.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
What a personality.
yeah, yeah.
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 And another, talking about, independence. I mean, I never read this bit. Of course, we knew about the tribal incursions, immediately after independence into Kashmir and all that.
Mm,
That's been this specific. I mean, I think you've done a great like service by putting it down, their stories of that time, because this is not I mean, we just know that these tribal things happened, and they came in from Pakistan, the newly formed state of Pakistan. But it's just like sort of glossed over. These things
mm,
happened. But this
mm,
level of detail that people themselves, what they experienced, I found that like really something. It's quite,
mm.
you know. So how
I
did you
I
gather this?
relied, yeah, I relied on a lot of other researchers for some of that. There was an academic, Harvard academic, Kim Gutchow, who spent a lot of
Mhm.
time there. She'd been living, I heard about her actually. She was living in the nunnery for several
Okay.
years actually.
Oh, okay.
Um, and she's actually written a book called Being a Buddhist Nun. It's sort of more
Um,
academic. Um, but she'd done interviews with some of the elders about what happened during partition. And yeah, and I was very lucky to speak to the King of Padum about this. And yeah, and I did hear a lot of what Kim said had matched up with things I'd heard mentioned by younger people, but I didn't. It sort of sounded like it was secondhand rumor, but it was backed
hmm,
up by what she said. So I felt good about including that. And the
hmm.
things, I mean, some things are so sad, there's somebody like Pema who spent her most of her life outside Zanskar. She wouldn't even know these at all.
Yes.
Whereas somebody like Norbu is probably now, dare I say, nearly 40, who remembers his father talking about things, and he'd been collecting stories himself, and his father had said, no, delete them all. We can forget the hard times, you know.
Oh,
But the thing is, which is his right to do that. But then you think of someone like Pema not actually knowing what happened in the past,
yeah.
not, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, just the fact that some of the younger people don't even know how the traditional way that they used to sleep, like in the fetal position, and all that, younger people would say, oh, we've never done any singing while working. And you talk to the older ladies, oh, they start singing away, so
Yeah.
it's important, as you say.